the Corgi again. Hi, this is Sally Morgan, physical therapist, craniosacral therapist, and Tellington T-Touch practitioner for animals and people. This is Tristan, he's a Corgi, and we're here for another episode of Conversations with a Corgi. And today we're interrupting our normally scheduled programming of looking at alternative therapies to talk about mooses, because I have now had for at least 3 or 4 days a yard moose. And I've gone through a lot of calls and talking to people and having some people come look at him, and I thought his story was compelling and interesting, and you guys might want to know about it. So I saw the moose Monday night afternoon, and then Tuesday I had some pictures of him from a distance. He's right out here, like literally as far as you can see to this fence is where he is. It's only about 150 feet from the house. And first I thought it was a female because I couldn't see the antlers. And then yesterday I was able to get very, very close, or actually the day before. And then yesterday even closer. And I could see that he had sort of pronghorn antelope antlers coming out and coming forward, which I thought was very unusual. And they were just straight sticks, you know, like about a foot long. And they did not look like moose antlers at all. So I spent about an hour sitting with him yesterday. He was really thin. He doesn't look good. He's not very tall. Mooses are usually substantially bigger than a horse, and this moose is very similarly sized to a 15 two-hand horse, except for his weight is very, very light. So I spent a lot of time with him yesterday, and at some point I thought, well, I'm going to send him Reiki. Why did he come to my yard? Why is he here, you know, watching me and not afraid of me? So I just put my hands up, as I've learned to do from some of my colleagues in the Reiki world, and just sent him energy. And he made a movement towards me and continued to come towards me like 5 steps, wading up to his knees in the stream, and seemed to really understand the Reiki. And I thought, well, I'm going to even do long distance T-Touch, which was only 50 feet or 20, 30 feet at that point, and some cranial work and see what he does. And he was intently watching me, very relaxed with his ears twitching. I felt completely safe. He is not aggressive towards me at all. He's very calm, actually. But over the course of the week, I haven't seen him eat anything. So I did the Reiki on him, and then I just had my hands down. I was taking pictures, and he started to get more relaxed, and he settled down. He put his nose out to hold his body, and I thought something was happening in that moment that was not good. And then he lowered his front end to the ground, and he was like that, supporting himself mostly with his head for a long time before he folded his back legs under him. And then he was laying what I thought was really in the stream, but actually he was sitting on a bit of a sandbar in the stream so that his belly was wet, but only about 3 inches underwater, and his feet were in the water. And I thought, wow, it's like a horse when they founder, like what a perfect place for him to be, but he doesn't have hooves like horses. So, and then I'll think in his condition, he's foundering. So he laid there all day yesterday, and he was so quiet. I could go down and take pictures. I could go outside of my fence and get literally like 15, 20 feet from him, even with my terrible iPhone pictures, compared to what some of my wonderful Corgi friends post online of butterflies and dogs. And I just wish, I mean, I do have a better camera, but it's very hard to get pictures from it to somewhere else. So I've just been using my phone. But he is just so peaceful with me. And I sent him Reiki throughout the day. I asked everyone I could think of on Facebook and groups that I'm in to send him Reiki and healing energy and strength. He really is weak. He needs strength. He laid in that stream while all this was going on until about 5 o'clock last night. And I've asked 2 people I know who are shamans to work with him. One last night and one this morning is going to work with him. And I went up the road. I was trying to figure out after I called the wildlife department, I found out several things that can happen to a moose. One is they get a brain worm, which usually kills an older moose because it takes that long for them to eat enough of the brain that the moose is disoriented. What a horrible disease. I also found out that there's something called a moose tick, which can be quite gigantic, like this big when it's engorged, and it makes them anemic and kills them, similar to what we have in some other wildlife. But that almost always happens in the late winter when they've had no food. And, we've had a weird tick year. We had a tremendous abundance of other types of ticks in July. So it could be ticks that's affecting this moose, but he doesn't appear to have any ticks on him. Usually the ears are just loaded with ticks and up under the groin. Don't see anything like that. Lungworm is another thing that can kill mooses, and he's not coughing at all. He's breathing normally, very slow breaths, like a horse when he's asleep, but not really coughing at all. And I've seen antelope with lungworm. He's nothing like that. Or elk with lungworm. So the other option is, was he hit by a car? I am about 1.5 miles from a major highway. And they said, well, he could have internal injuries. Well, his legs are strong. I can see by how he's walking that he has no injuries, no fractures in his legs. His pelvis is so thin, I think I would be aware if there was some dysymmetry there, but even his pelvis looks strong. His ribs don't look broken. His chest looks okay. So I'm kind of ruling that out. So the wildlife guy I called from the state, it turns out my regular wildlife guy doesn't handle mooses. They're considered a state issue. So I had to call the state wildlife department, which has offices all over the place. And so I left a message at the state office in Marlborough, Mass, or somewhere out there. And then I found when I looked online that there's one in Belchertown, which is a little closer to me. There's also one in Sunderland, but apparently they don't handle this sort of thing. So I called Sunderland or Belchertown, and this guy called me back, and Mr. Fuller, he was very nice, and he told me some of the things that can kill a moose. And he said, well, how long has he been there and what's he looking like? And he said he's going to come out today to check him out because, as my regular wildlife guy told me, they do like to keep track of things like, tick counts, diseases, what's going on. Apparently our local moose population is really being decimated by this tick problem. And my regular wildlife guy said, in fact, they may be extinct in Massachusetts in the next few years just because the tick problem has gotten so bad here for them. So the guy, Mr. Fuller from Belchertown, is going to come out today, and he said, most often it's going to be internal injuries from a car or a truck hitting him. And I said, but his legs are completely intact and they're very tall. If he was hit by anything, it was a semi that did not hit his legs, but hit his upper half. And, he looks so bad that it's kind of, if he was near the highway and not moving very fast, I think he could have been injured. But the day continued. And so I called the other wildlife guy from this Maine state office called me, not Maine, Massachusetts. I mean, Maine, the state, but Maine, like the big office here. He called and told me a little bit more because he had a lot more time. And he said, well, what will happen is they'll come out and assess him. And because he's so close to my house, if they have to put him down, they have to call the state police. And I said, well, if you have a bobcat, those little tractors, you can probably pull him out and take him in to do a necropsy and assess what's going on or what killed him or what was making him so sick. And he said, oh my God, the state doesn't have anything like that. And I thought, oh my God, if they don't even have that, they're not going to necessarily even have a pickup truck to put him in. And he's not that big. I think you could get him in a pickup truck. And he said, well, they'll only have like 2 or 3 guys, and he's going to weigh 500-600 pounds. We can't lift him or drag him anywhere. So I started calling farmers around that I know, horse people. They always know where there's a backhoe because one of the sad and terrible things about horses is that they die and it's very hard to figure out what to do with them. In states like New Jersey, where my sister is, you call a chuck wagon guy and he comes with many dead animals and takes them away. Here, oh, there's an eagle coming in. You know, you think I'd live in Colorado with this kind of wildlife around here, but I really only live 2 miles from a major town, but I am near a big wildlife preserve. I wonder if that he was heading straight for the moose. So anyway, I called one of my farmer friends and they said, well, we could come over, but we'd have to load the backhoe on a flatbed, drive it the 10 miles to your house. We'd have to dig a hole, we'd have to pull him up, we'd have to put him in the ground, and it's going to cost quite a bit of money. And I can't believe that it's your problem that you have a dead moose at your house. And I was like, well, he's not dead yet. And that person advocated heavily for me to chase him and get some people and try to scoot him into the woods more deeply so that he wouldn't be like right in my yard if something happens. So I said, no, he looks too sick. I don't think he'll move. And then I got off the phone with her and I thought, you know what? There's a farmer up my road like her who grows Christmas trees. And I went tearing up the road in my car and banged on the door. And a very nice fellow came to the door who knew the woman who lived in my house before me quite well and had done quite a bit of tree surveying. He actually knows the plot of my land here, which I have no idea about. So he came. Thank God he has a family emergency today that he's attending to, but he took the time to come down, and it turns out he's a retired forest man who worked in the Quabbin Reservoir, and he's seen many, many mooses and moose situations over his years. He was telling me about the nests where they sleep in the winter and these giant ticks being in the nest and how awful it is. And he was telling me about when they've seen them, when they've been hit by a car or something, they're always like markedly limping. So before he had come over, my friend Erica, who does some shamanic work and other healing work, had come by with her dog, and I was on the phone. So she went out in the yard, and the two dogs, she has Coco, Tristan's girlfriend, they were running around and barking and playing, and Erica was taking pictures. The moose didn't move or get up. She was very quiet. She told me she was singing to him, and he seemed to notice and perk his ears towards her. So I come into the house and go get the wildlife guy, the forest guy, and come down here. And the forest guy comes back, and he's taking a look at him, and he said, you know, he does not look like he's been hit by a car. They usually have bloody gashes or signs of injury. He also told me that this antler growth is highly unusual. They never look like this, which made me as a craniosacral therapist immediately think, oh my God, maybe he has some problems in his dural tube and in his brain that are just adding up. And, you know, he's got some kind of genetic malformation that is making him unable to survive. Because this guy said he thought he could have even been a calf this spring because he's kind of little, or a late summer calf last year. So the conclusion is the moose is only a year or so old. And he came with me around the side of the fence. He was looking to, with his tractor, how he was going to pull out a carcass. And he knew this property had lots and lots of trees and was concerned about digging also. So lo and behold, we walked down to the side of the stream because I wanted to see how steep it was. And the moose's demeanor changed immediately. I mean, it was just remarkable. He has been so peaceful and quiet with me. He saw this guy, he put his head up, he got stiff, he had his ears pinned on him, and he was like, oh my God. And it was just amazing. I mean, this moose had walked to me for Reiki. He had been listening to Erica singing to him. And when he saw a forestry man who's been retired, he was like, I'm getting up. So he got out of the stream. He stood up pretty well, a lot stronger than he had gone down. He waded across the stream and over into some marsh that's even closer to my house, and stood there. And the guy looked at him and he said, that moose has not been hit by a car. He is moving way too well, and he is really thin, and he is quite young, but he does not look like he has any of the typical problems. And he said, possibly it is the brainworm, and that, you know, maybe he had other issues, and that's why it's affecting him more than, you know, it usually does. He said it usually takes 6 or 7 years for that to kill a moose. So he's kind of interested to see what the biology guy says when he comes today. But he didn't think the moose looked that bad. He said, I wouldn't let them put him down. Not like I own the moose, but he is on my property, so I guess I can keep people from being in here. I've got 7 acres. He can go pretty far. And he said he's seen lots of them up at his property, and I said, well, if they shoot him, can somebody eat him? And he said, no, it has to be during moose hunting season, and then someone's allowed to take him. And I said, well, when's that? And he said, the winter. And I didn't even know we had moose hunting season in Massachusetts. There's not that many of them. So, and he told me a lot about my property and things I didn't know. But he thought the moose looked pretty good, and he was remarkably stronger than he had been the day before when or early in the morning when he had laid down. So today I went out and took some more pictures of him, and he's again sleeping, but now in the marshy area. He looks very comfortable. He looks a lot stronger and brighter. I think, thank you everyone who is seeing this, who has been sending him Reiki and healing energy. I really think it's helping him. And so the wildlife guy will be here sometime today to talk to me about what's going to happen with the moose. And I realized that this marshland behind my house goes all the way up the road to where the forest guy lives. So the forest guy will actually be able to keep an eye on him if he does decide to take off. My impression, I mean, he pointed this out as I well knew, the habitat here is ideal for mooses, ideal, perfect. Whatever a moose needs is right here. So he's pretty smart to be where he is. Of course he is, because he's an animal and they're much smarter than we think. So he doesn't have to move more than a foot to get water or really good grasses. So he's in a good place to kind of be in a recovery mode and just kind of take it easy. So we'll see what happens today. My friend Tracy's going to do some work with him this morning. Wildlife guy's coming sometime before 3 o'clock, and we'll go from there. But in the meantime, I wanted to share with you some pretty interesting information about mooses, which I've gotten from Ted Andrews' book. Ted Andrews, a famous kind of shaman animal guru, and he has a book called Animal Speak, and then he has 2 or 3 others like it. And in the Animal Speak book, he has 2 or 3 pages about many different animals and what they mean and what they've meant in other cultures and what it means when you start to have a relationship with one. So mooses are associated with primal feminine energy and the magic of life and death. So of course, a moose is going to come to my house if he's in a life and death struggle. And I may do some more work with him today. I have to work on my TED Talk, but I myself may do some more work with him, maybe some emotion code work with the pendulum. I may go play him the tuning forks. And their cycle of power is late fall and early winter, so November. And it's the time of approaching shadows. And part of that shadow image is associated with mooses in that you can be staring directly at one and not see him. And when I first saw the moose, I went out there and I tried to get a better view, so I had to go between, a tree was between me and him, and I just stepped to the side and he moved 5 feet and I could not see him. I mean, they just vanish into the shadows. And they're a dark, dark, dark brown, not as black as a bear, but they hold still, and their legs just look like little trees, and they've got little twiggies all around them, and you cannot see them. So that also bespeaks part of their other element, similar to coyotes, which we also have. They are shapeshifters. They are able to travel between worlds and the shadow world and the daylight world pretty seamlessly because of their ability to hide. And they are apparently able to hold their breath and swim underwater for up to 1.5 minutes and graze on the weeds at the bottom of the water and then come back up. So they're like whales, and they've been associated as being whales on the ground, which I think is really interesting because they are so big. I mean, they're generally much bigger than this guy. They're generally solitary animals. And of course, as we all know from what we've seen in pictures of Alaska and Maine, a male moose in rut, which is around this time of year, is very dangerous. You do not want to get near one, and you certainly don't want to disturb a mother and her calf. And they are known to be quite fierce during times of high arousal, like this time of year. This guy, definitely not fierce. And I said to my neighbor, like, why are the coyotes around? Have you seen them lately? And he said, oh, he saw one 2 days ago, a couple of them up behind his house. And it's literally a mile away, not even, probably 3/4 of a mile. And I said, well, why aren't the coyotes coming? I mean, this is perfect. Like, what they would eat is a sick moose, delicious meal. And he said, in fact, a moose like this, even in his state, is a pretty fierce opponent to a couple of coyotes, and that they could not take him down. And I said, but they're huge. And he said, believe me, a moose can defend himself pretty easily from a coyote, and a coyote won't risk injury by attacking a moose, which, anybody watching this who's in the West probably knows way more about this than I do. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And the moose is also associated with contradictions because they're kind of big and ungainly, but they're very graceful and able to move really quietly, and they're much faster moving than you think. I just love them. We used to call my horse Burgers a moose. And when I first saw him, I thought, oh my God, is this a message from Burgers? Because Burgers would be trotting along through the woods on the trail and stop dead and reach out and pull moss off of a tree and eat it. He just loved bark and moss. And one of my students who had him for a while, and she came back from a trail ride one day, and I said, how was your ride? And she said, well, he did more than the usual amount of moosing, so we didn't go very far. And she meant that he had been eating trees and leaves as they were trotting by. And my rule with him always was, you can eat whatever you want when we're riding as long as you don't stop. And so he had learned that he could do that. So I've always thought of him as a moose. He was the same color as a moose. He had a very big moosey head. There's pictures of him all over my pages if you want to look at him. He looks pretty moosey, especially in the winter. So moose calves, unusually for a mammal, are born with their eyes open, which is significant because people who resonate with moose medicine came into the world with their inner eyes already open. It is not unusual to find such individuals getting discouraged when they work to find their inner thoughts and turn on the inner lights, as so many of them already have psychic and intuitive capabilities that they've been born with, so you don't need to turn them on. And it says if a moose calf makes it through the first month, it's likely to survive to become an adult. That's a good sign for this guy. And it is not uncommon to find those with moose medicine having had their difficult and sometimes traumatic lessons of their life during their childhood. That's not really true for me. And they have an innate ability to draw on the creative force of the feminine waters of life to strengthen and sustain them. So of course this guy is out here in my stream. He's gone to waters where all life comes from and all life goes back to. So it's pretty interesting when I was reading what Ted Andrews wrote and what this moose's behavior is. They're herbivorous, so anybody who is related to moose energy should be a vegetarian, and I certainly am. And if you want to align with the moose power in particular. And chemical medicines usually have a bad effect on somebody that has a lot of moose energy, and herbal alternatives are better because of their herbaceous quality. And that's certainly true of me. I mean, it was the Benadryl in my IV when I was getting chemo that was hurting me. So that is pretty typical for me. And they say that only the male species grows antlers unless there's a hormone imbalance in the female. That's kind of interesting considering this moose's different antler arrangement. This moose does not have any visible business downstairs, and that's usually pretty obvious. So I am kind of wondering when he stands up again if it might be a female with a problem because of the way the antlers are. And maybe this guy coming today will know more about this antler situation. And the other fascinating thing to me about mooses, because their antlers are so big, and antler velvet is associated with rebirth, that mooses are associated with head, neck, and shoulder pain, all of which I have, and that they also benefit tremendously from, yes, it says right here, craniosacral therapy. So I think it's a good thing I was doing cranial work on that moose, and I may go do some more with him today. And it's the moose also has a need for a lot of massage because of a lot of the memories of the past are held in the antlers when they fall off. And autumn is their most powerful time, so that speaks well for this guy to rally and make it, particularly Halloween, and that is just weeks away, so maybe he will go on. Seeing a moose has always been a powerful omen. When it appears in dreams, it reflects a long, good life. We know it to give strength. And more than one Indian tribe believed that you could travel 3 times as fast and 3 times as long after you'd eaten moose. And the moose apparently has no natural enemies except the grizzly bear, which we don't have around here. Apparently it can outrun and outswim even the grizzly bear. So So if this guy were feeling well, he could easily gallop away. So it says, when a moose comes into your life, the primal contact with the great feminine force and void of life is being awakened. And I think it's interesting that many people working with this moose and helping him are women, but there are also some men. It's an invitation to learn to explore new depths of awareness and sensitivity within yourself and within your environment. So I found that pretty interesting. And also it says that the moose, because of the antlers, it has symbolic relationships to the upper chakras, particularly the intuition of the third eye and the crown chakra, that connection to the divine. And those are certainly the chakras where I have work done and where I work out of. So I think it's no small coincidence that this moose is in my yard. So thank you everyone who is sending him healing energy. I think it's really helping him, and I am hoping that he will gain strength and go on and survive. And I'll be really curious to see what the wildlife guy says today. I of course had a terrible kind of headache yesterday, not necessarily related to the moose, but I did have to get some work done to kind of straighten myself out. So I found it really interesting that Ted Andrews' description of moose medicine has a lot to do with things that I struggle with and some of my good qualities as well. So that was pretty interesting. So I will keep you all posted on how the moose is doing. We will be back tomorrow with another episode of Conversations with a Corgi, and we will have a moose update and continue on looking at some alternative medicine techniques that you might want to take your horse or your dog or your cat or your bunny over to see somebody who practices these techniques. So we will be back tomorrow. Thanks for joining us. And again, thank you all so much for helping me with this moose. And I just want to do a heart hug for the moose. They're such majestic animals, really. It is a gift that this moose is here and I can take such beautiful pictures, even though he's not at his best, but he still is a wonderful treasure. So thanks everyone for joining us today for Conversations with a Corgi, where we talked about mooses, not corgis. It's kind of interesting though. Corgi barking, Cairn Terrier barking, not a problem for the moose. But a man wearing Carhartts coming through the brush is very nervous. Thanks for joining us today. Everyone have a great day. Enjoy the beautiful weather we're having. We're just so lucky to have had such a good fall here. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you soon.